Welcome to Shatter.
Her friend said it casually, like it had already been decided. She leaned against the counter by the grill, wine glass steady, eyes sliding past me toward the backyard where my wife was laughing with my commercial director. She asked when I was moving on, as if the house had already changed owners and I was the last piece of furniture waiting to be hauled out. The question landed in public. A backyard full of people from our circle. Clients, neighbors, my crew. The smell of smoke and meat hung in the air, the kind of Saturday everyone pretends is relaxed. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. I stood there, holding a paper plate that was already cold, and let the silence stretch long enough to make a few heads turn. My wife, Emily, was busy performing. She always was. She worked PR for a living and never really clocked out. Her laugh traveled. Her hand kept finding Mark's arm as she spoke, her tone light, practiced, safe. Mark had been my commercial director for 5 years. He knew my schedules, my margins, my blind spots. He came to our house like family. He knew where we kept the spare keys. No one noticed me step back. That's the thing about being reliable for too long. People stop tracking you. I walked through the house instead of around it, past the framed photos we'd curated for visitors. Awards, groundbreakings, smiling shots from projects that mattered to me more than they ever did to her. In the hallway, my phone vibrated with notifications from a group chat labeled Core Team. Mark was typing. Emily was tagged in a photo someone had just posted from the yard. I didn't open any of it. In the bedroom, I closed the door and stood there long enough to hear the party continue without me. Laughter rose and fell. Someone turned the music up. The house didn't change when I stopped being part of it. Later, when I came back outside, Emily barely glanced at me. Her friend avoided my eyes. Mark raised his glass in my direction, a small gesture that looked like respect if you didn't know how to read it. That night, after everyone left, Emily talked about how successful the barbecue had been. She mentioned how important it was to keep appearances strong. She didn't ask why I'd gone quiet. I went to bed without setting my alarm. Before turning off the light, I opened my phone and removed myself from the core team chat. No message, no explanation, just absence. It was the first move. The first crack didn't come from my wife. It came from someone who had nothing to gain by lying to me. On Monday morning, I walked into the office like I always did. Same parking spot, same nods from the crew, same smell of coffee and dust. The building hummed the way it always had, steady, predictable. Mark wasn't there yet. Emily had already left for her day, dressed sharper than usual, phone pressed to her ear as she walked out, voice low, controlled. By lunch, my operations manager, Steve, stopped by my office without knocking. He'd worked with me since the early days, back when we shared a trailer and a folding table. He stood there longer than necessary, eyes scanning the room as if checking for cameras that weren't there. He mentioned a project delay that didn't exist, a supplier issue that had already been resolved. Then he said Mark had been authorizing changes directly with clients again, bypassing protocol. He said it casually, but his jaw stayed tight. I didn't respond. I let him keep talking. Steve said it was probably nothing. He said Mark had been spending a lot of evenings on strategy with Emily lately, trying to align messaging for upcoming bids. He said the words carefully, like he was placing them on a table between us and stepping back. I thanked him and told him I'd look into it. He didn't look relieved. He looked concerned, like someone who had just passed a weight he'd been carrying for too long. After he left, I opened my calendar. Meetings I hadn't scheduled. Dinners marked as client-facing that didn't include me. Travel blocks that overlapped with mine in ways that didn't make sense. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't text Emily. I didn't call Mark. I watched. That evening, Emily talked about work the way she always did, confident and smooth, framing small wins like major victories. She mentioned Mark's name more than once, always paired with words like reliable and aligned. She didn't notice that I stopped reacting. She didn't notice that I stopped asking questions. Later, when she fell asleep with her phone face down on the nightstand, it buzzed once. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The pattern was already forming. The barbecue hadn't been a slip. It had been confidence. People don't ask when you're moving on unless they think the door is already open. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. No title, no notes. Just a blank page that stayed open while I closed every shared folder tied to my name and created new access levels no one else could see. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt in any way that showed. I was precise. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever they thought was happening quietly behind my back had been happening for a long time. And the version of me they were used to was already gone. I didn't go looking for proof the way angry men do. I didn't dig through phones or demand explanations. I stayed inside my routine and let the routine betray them. By midweek, patterns replaced suspicion. Mark's expense reports crossed my desk the way they always had, clean on the surface, precise enough to pass a glance. I stopped glancing. I read them. Dinners logged as client development that lined up too neatly with Emily's late meetings. Hotel upgrades justified as availability issues, always in cities where she claimed to be repositioning the brand. Travel receipts attached to projects that hadn't moved an inch. I forwarded nothing. I flagged nothing. I saved copies to a private drive that synced to nothing and no one. In the office, Mark played his role perfectly. He spoke for me in meetings I didn't attend. He reassured clients that I was focused on long-term growth. He told people I trusted him completely. Every sentence bought him more room. At home, Emily stayed smooth. She controlled the narrative the way she always had, filling the space with confidence so no one thought to question it. She talked about optics, about how perception mattered more than facts. She kissed me like a habit and moved through the house like it belonged to her alone. What changed wasn't them. It was me. I stopped correcting timelines. I stopped syncing calendars. I stopped stepping in when decisions drifted past my desk. When Mark authorized a pricing change without me, I let it stand. When Emily volunteered my company for a charity appearance I hadn't approved, I didn't object. I watched who benefited. One afternoon, my accountant called to clarify a wire transfer that had been routed through a subsidiary I hadn't touched in years. Mark had signed off. Emily had introduced the vendor. The numbers were clean enough to look intentional, sloppy enough to be traced. I thanked him and asked him to hold everything exactly as it was. That evening, Emily mentioned an upcoming trip she hadn't told me about yet. She said it lightly, like it was an oversight, not a choice. Mark's name didn't come up. It didn't need to. Later, alone, I logged into the back end of our company's systems and changed nothing that would alert anyone. I created mirrors, shadows, quiet redundancies that recorded every movement without interfering. The proof didn't arrive all at once. It stacked itself patiently, transaction by transaction, message by message, decision by decision. It told a story that didn't need interpretation. By the end of the week, I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't hoping to be wrong. I wasn't waiting for a confession. I had confirmation. And I had time. I didn't announce anything. There was no confrontation, no signal flare. I just stopped being reachable in the ways they were used to. It started small. I left the group chats one by one, not all at once. No notifications. No explanations. The company messaging app showed my name, then didn't. Meetings were still scheduled with me attached, but I didn't show up. I sent a single message to my executive assistant asking her to route all decisions through legal and block my calendar into controlled windows. She replied with a question mark. I didn't answer. Emily noticed the silence before she noticed the absence. She asked if I'd seen a message she'd sent earlier. I told her I must have missed it. My tone didn't change. I didn't slow down. I moved through the house like a guest who knew where everything was but didn't touch much anymore. By midweek, I packed for a trip she didn't know about. No dramatic goodbye. No explanation. I left before she woke up and took a car instead of driving myself. At the airport, I turned off location sharing and powered down my personal phone. I kept a separate device active, one she didn't have the number for. From a distance, everything kept running. That was the point. Payroll went out. Vendors were paid. Projects moved forward. But access changed. Signatures were rerouted. Approval chains shortened in ways that didn't include Mark. The systems recognized me. They didn't recognize him the same way anymore. Emily started calling that evening. Then texting. Then calling again. The messages shifted tone as the hours passed. First logistical, then confused, then sharp. She asked where I was. She asked why my phone was off. She asked if something was wrong. I didn't respond. Mark tried next, through a professional channel. He asked if I was available to sign off on a revision. He added that it was time-sensitive. He copied people I hadn't spoken to in days. The request sat unanswered. By the next day, the noise spread outward. My assistant fielded questions she couldn't answer. Clients were told I was unavailable, but still involved. Emily reached out to my sister. My sister told her I was fine. From where I was, I watched it ripple. Not with satisfaction. With clarity. Silence does something to people who are used to managing narratives. It removes their script. Emily couldn't explain my absence because she didn't know why it existed. Mark couldn't fill the gap because he didn't control the process anymore. I wasn't gone. I was present in a different way. I observed messages stack up unanswered. I saw meetings stall without my name attached. I watched confidence turn into improvisation. By the time Emily realized this wasn't a phase or a misunderstanding, it was already too late to stop. The version of me she could reach no longer existed. And the space I left behind wasn't empty. It was deliberate. Mark panicked before Emily did. He was used to leverage, not silence. From where I was, I saw it in the small shifts. He started copying more people on emails, widening the circle like volume could replace authority. He referenced past approvals that suddenly didn't matter. He framed decisions as urgent, hoping pressure would force my hand. Nothing moved. What he didn't know was that the leverage he'd built his position on was already hollow. Weeks earlier, I'd noticed how much he liked shortcuts. Vendors he trusted a little too easily. Side agreements he justified as efficiency. He was careful, but not disciplined. That's always the difference. Discipline survives attention. Carefulness doesn't. I didn't expose him. I didn't threaten him. I didn't even contact him. I made a call to a compliance consultant I'd worked with years before on a federal project. Quiet reputation. Clean hands. I asked for a routine review of one subsidiary's processes, framed as preparation for future growth. Nothing accusatory. Just thorough. The request went out officially from legal. Mark wasn't looped in. The review triggered questions from banks and partners that couldn't be brushed off. Requests for documentation. Clarifications on approvals. Timelines that suddenly mattered. Mark responded the only way he knew how, by explaining too much. Emily tried to regain control at home. She framed my absence as stress. As strategy. She told people I trusted her with everything. She smiled harder. She posted more. She performed stability like it could anchor reality. It didn't. One afternoon, I received a message forwarded by my attorney. A lender had flagged irregularities tied to Mark's authorizations. Nothing criminal yet. Just enough to freeze certain lines pending review. The structure he'd built himself into began to wobble. I didn't intervene. Inside the company, people adjusted without announcing it. They routed questions away from Mark. They waited for confirmations that didn't come. His authority depended on proximity to me, and that proximity no longer existed. Emily called again that evening. Her voice was controlled, but the timing was wrong. She wasn't calling about us. She was calling about the fallout. I didn't answer. From a distance, I watched the pressure close in from angles he couldn't anticipate. Not because I pushed it, but because I stopped holding it together for him. Systems don't collapse when attacked. They collapse when support is withdrawn. By the time Mark realized the ground under him wasn't solid, it was already shifting in public ways he couldn't hide. And Emily was standing next to him, trying to manage optics with no access to the truth. I stayed exactly where I was. Silent. Present. Unavailable. The move wasn't revenge. It was gravity. The shift became visible before it became loud. It showed up at a client luncheon I wasn't supposed to attend. Emily arrived alone, confident as ever, wearing the expression she used when she expected reassurance. She moved through the room like someone used to being anchored by a name that carried weight. But the questions didn't come the way they used to. People asked where I was, then quickly redirected the conversation when she answered too smoothly. Mark arrived late. He spoke louder than necessary. He laughed at things no one had finished saying. From a distance, I followed the reports as they filtered back through people who didn't realize they were reporting anything. A project manager mentioned that a client had requested written confirmation from legal instead of verbal approval from Mark. A supplier asked whether Mark still had signing authority. No one accused. They simply checked. Emily felt it first with her friends. Invitations slowed. Conversations shortened. The kind of women who once lingered around her now glanced at their phones mid-sentence, distracted by something more stable. One of them made a comment she couldn't dismiss, asking if everything was okay at home, saying she'd heard I was difficult to reach lately. Emily laughed it off. She always did. The real hit came when Mark's name stopped opening doors. At a regional meeting, someone asked him to wait while they verified something with legal. He stood there longer than expected. People watched. No one said anything. Later, a mutual acquaintance told Emily that the room had gone quiet when Mark mentioned my name, like people were suddenly unsure which version of the story they were supposed to believe. I didn't release information. I didn't correct assumptions. I didn't need to. Absence creates its own narrative, and it's rarely flattering to the people left behind. Emily tried to regain footing by hosting dinners, small gatherings. She leaned into familiarity, into warmth. But without my presence, the dynamic shifted. People left earlier. Conversations stayed shallow. No one lingered in the kitchen anymore. Mark stopped coming over. Inside the company, the distancing became structural. Emails began addressing departments instead of him. Decisions waited for confirmations that routed around his office. He was still employed, still visible, but no longer central. Emily reached out to people she trusted for reassurance. They offered sympathy without substance. No one challenged her. No one defended her. That silence was louder than confrontation. I watched from exactly where I'd placed myself. Not hidden, just unavailable. By the time Emily realized the room had turned without her noticing, she was already standing alone in it. The control she'd relied on wasn't taken from her. It dissolved when no one else played along. And for the first time, she couldn't tell whether I was watching or already gone. Emily started reaching outward when she realized there was nothing left to hold onto inside. She went to people who had always answered her calls. Friends who used to respond instantly now replied hours later, if at all. When they did, their messages were careful, neutral, padded with concern that didn't lead anywhere. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer help. They closed conversations politely and moved on. She tried family next. Her mother listened, then suggested she give me space. Her brother told her I'd always been steady and that maybe this was something she needed to let play out. No one took her side. No one challenged mine. At home, the house felt different to her. Not emptier, just unresponsive. The system still worked. The bills were paid. The lights turned on. But nothing reacted to her anymore. My name stopped opening doors she was used to walking through without thinking. She left messages on my voicemail that never got returned. Some were calm, some sharp, some carefully emotional, like she was testing which version might reach me. None of them did. Inside the company, Mark began to distance himself from her. Not openly, quietly. He stopped sharing updates. He avoided being seen with her in professional settings. He framed his stress as work-related when she asked what was wrong. He started protecting himself. That's when Emily realized she wasn't standing beside him. She was standing in front of him. I crossed paths with her once in public. A neutral place. She didn't expect to see me. Her body reacted before her face caught up. She slowed, then stopped, like she was waiting for permission to approach. I didn't give it. I nodded. Polite. Distant. The kind of acknowledgement you give someone you recognize, but no longer know. I didn't ask how she was. I didn't explain anything. I moved past her without changing pace. People noticed. That moment traveled faster than any message she could send. The way I didn't lean in. The way I didn't soften. The way I didn't perform closure for her benefit. It told them everything they needed to know without a single word being exchanged. Emily felt it immediately. The isolation wasn't dramatic. It was clean. Precise. No one blamed her. No one defended her. They simply adjusted their behavior as if the version of her they'd relied on was no longer relevant. That night, she sat alone with her phone in her hand, refreshing conversations that didn't move. For the first time, there was no audience to manage. No narrative to spin. Just space. And the knowledge that I was somewhere outside of it, unchanged by her absence. She waited longer than she should have before trying to face me directly. By then, the ground had already shifted under her. Emily showed up where she knew I would be, not at home and not at work, but in a space that used to feel neutral between us. She didn't rush. She didn't cause a scene. She stood there, composed, like she was walking into a meeting she still believed she could manage. I saw her before she saw me. Her posture gave her away. The control was practiced, but the timing was off. She wasn't early. She wasn't late. She was uncertain. When she noticed me, she smiled in a way that used to disarm people. It didn't reach me. She stepped closer and said my name, testing it like a key she wasn't sure still fit. I stopped. I faced her. I didn't close the distance. She asked if we could talk. Not about anything specific. Just talk. She framed it as clarity. as concern, as something we both deserved. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands didn't. I didn't answer right away. Silence does that thing where it forces people to keep filling the space. She added that she hadn't understood what was happening, that she felt shut out, that she was worried. I told her I was busy, not cold, not sharp, just factual. The words landed harder than anything emotional could have. She recalibrated instantly, shifting tone, softening, trying a version of herself she thought I might recognize. She mentioned the company, the pressure Mark was under, the confusion everyone felt. I listened without interrupting. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask questions that would invite explanation. When she paused, waiting for me to step in, I said there was nothing to discuss right now. She asked if this was about something she'd done, about something Mark had done, about the distance. I looked at her long enough for her to notice I wasn't searching for words. I told her I'd made my decisions and that the process was already in motion. That was it. No accusations, no evidence, no explanation. Her face shifted then, not into anger, but into something less controlled. She asked what that meant for us, for the house, for the life we'd built. I told her those questions had answers. They just weren't mine to provide anymore. I stepped past her. I didn't rush. I didn't linger. Behind me, she stayed where she was, holding a conversation that had ended without ever really starting. The collapse didn't arrive as one event. It came in layers, each one removing something she'd assumed was permanent. Mark was the first thing to go. Not dramatically, not publicly. He stopped answering her messages with urgency. Then he stopped answering them at all. When she pressed, he framed everything as pressure, compliance, survival. He didn't meet her eyes when they crossed paths. He positioned himself as busy, distracted, cornered by forces he couldn't control. Soon after, his title changed. Quietly. No announcement. No farewell email. A restructuring decision approved without his input. He remained employed, but the authority he'd worn so comfortably was gone. People who used to wait for his approval began routing around him. Emily felt that shift immediately. She had built her confidence on proximity to power, and suddenly the power wasn't standing still. Her reputation followed. Invitations she expected never arrived. A board she'd advised asked to pause their engagement. A client she'd counted on chose another firm without explanation. No one accused her of anything. They simply chose distance. At home, the reality set in. Legal documents arrived through channels she couldn't redirect. Decisions were already made. Accounts separated. Access adjusted. Everything handled with the same restraint I'd used since the beginning. She went back through old moments then. Not to relive them, but to search them. The times I'd stepped in without being asked. The way I'd handled problems quietly so she could present a clean version of our life. The stability she'd assumed was just there, like infrastructure, not something maintained by choice. Those memories didn't arrive gently. They came as interruptions. A comment someone made about how dependable I'd always been. A photo surfaced from a project launch she'd almost skipped. A text thread she reread where I'd resolved an issue she'd never even noticed existed. Each recollection landed like evidence she hadn't known she was collecting. When she finally reached out again, it wasn't to negotiate or explain. It was to ask where I was. Not physically, existentially. As if she'd only just realized I wasn't orbiting her anymore. I didn't answer. The house felt too large for her then. Not empty. Exposed. Every room carried reminders of a life that no longer responded to her direction. The silence didn't accuse her. It simply existed, unmoved by her presence. By the time she understood the full shape of what she'd lost, there was nothing left to grab onto. No audience. No leverage. No partner waiting quietly in the background. Just the understanding that the ground she'd stood on had been held together by someone who had already let go. I didn't come back to end things. They were already ended. I came back to close the space on my terms. We met in the house we'd shared, the one that still looked the same from the outside. Nothing dramatic had been removed. No rooms emptied. No photos torn down. The familiarity made it harder for her. It made it clear that what was gone wasn't the setting. It was me. Emily stood near the kitchen island, hands resting on the surface like she needed something solid. She didn't rush into words this time. She waited, watching me the way you watch someone who no longer belongs to you, but still controls the temperature in the room. I didn't sit. I stayed where I was. She spoke carefully. not to defend herself, not to accuse. She said she finally understood how much she hadn't seen, how much she'd assumed would always be there. She said losing Mark had been loud, but losing me had been quiet in a way she couldn't escape. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. When she finished, the silence stretched. She looked at me like she was waiting for a verdict. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I said I'd simply stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. The words didn't carry heat. They didn't need to. She asked what happened next. Not what she could do. Not how to fix things. Just what happened next. I told her the structure was already in place. The business would continue without disruption. The separation would be handled cleanly. There would be no spectacle. No dragging things out. No rewriting the story for public comfort. She asked if there was any chance of starting over. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was considering it, but because some pauses matter more than decisions. I told her that anything that existed going forward would exist under new rules. Mutuality, distance, respect that didn't need to be managed or performed. I said I wasn't offering reassurance. I was stating conditions. She nodded, slowly, like someone who finally understood the cost of not paying attention. When I left, I didn't look back. Not because I was trying to prove something, but because there was nothing left to check. I walked out the way I'd walked through everything else. Calm, deliberate, unavailable. I hadn't vanished. I'd just chosen not to return to a place where my presence had been taken for granted. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.